It's time for Football at 4 with Geoff Mosher.
My personality is I want to win badly. I want to win more Lombardis for Philadelphia and our fans. We got the greatest fans around, and I will do everything possible.
Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Josh Hennick filling in for Mike Gill the rest of the way. Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Q&A dropped this morning. That's right. Jason Avant, Quentin Michael, great stuff every single week. Great content on the Inside the Birds podcasting network. And Geoff Mosher joins us for a Wednesday edition here on the Sports Bash, being brought to you by Dr. Lyle M. Back for everything from skincare to cosmetic surgery. Go to iloveLyleBack.com or call 856-MAKEOVER for Dr. Lyle M. Back, proud sponsor of Football at 4. And there he is, live on the stream in living color. Geoff Mosher joins us as he does each Wednesday. Geoff, how you doing today?
Good, man. Good, man. So what's the deal here? Gil just pieced out at 4 o'clock and sent him out?
Well, the way it works is Gil didn't have to actually be out of the building until this evening because, that's when he had to go. So that's when he had to go.
So he just dropped out in the middle of the show. That sounds like Gil. Okay. All right.
I hope he's listening so he can harass you and not me about that comment.
I hope so.
So, Geoff, obviously, the Eagles, the storylines, the conversation never ceases, never goes away. And I want to start with the more recent news, which is something that I feel like you and Adam have talked about maybe a billion times at this point on the Inside the Birds podcast, which is this guy named Joe Flacco coming to be the Eagles' backup. I know you guys talked about it last year. You and Adam talked about it all the last few months, and now finally it's here. So just give the audience a little information about why is Joe Flacco here?
Well, the Eagles need a backup quarterback. We've talked about that for quite a while. They only have one quarterback on the roster until Joe Flacco, and that was Jalen Hurts. And you just can't go into an offseason or even a season, right? Can't go into OTAs with just one quarterback on the roster, and you can't rely on the draft for it. So you have to have a backup, and you have to have a veteran backup when you have a young quarterback like Jalen Hurts. Joe Flacco is obviously familiar with the area, being from South Jersey, Audubon High School. He is a quarterback that the Eagles have had their eyes on in the past. Last year he was coming back from kind of a neck injury that I believe required a procedure. So there was some risk involved, I guess they felt, in signing him, but the Jets did. I know the numbers stink, but I watched a couple of games, and the bottom line for Joe Flacco being a backup, he can still throw the ball fairly well. I don't think he's got a dead arm or lost a whole lot of strength. He's always had one of the best arms in the league. He knows West Coast offense as well. And the big key, Josh, is that he was $3.5 million guaranteed, which, although it's more than the Jets gave him coming off the surgery and all, it certainly fits right with their philosophy that they don't want to be the team that pays, upwards of $7 to $10 million anymore for back. They didn't even want to pay, $5 million, I'm guess, for a Jacoby Brissett or a Tyrod Taylor. I forget the numbers on him, but they were able to get themselves a good, solid backup for not a lot of money. And if something were to happen to Jalen Hurts or any other quarterback they were on, this guy can go in and do an admirable job. I laugh, Josh, when people go, Joe Flacco, have you seen him play? Oh my God. So I play this game with people, right? Because I've had this conversation with like 3 or 4 people in the past 48 hours. And I say, okay, let's take Joe Flacco out of the occasion. How do you feel about Blaine Gabbert? Oh, terrible. How do you feel about Colt McCoy? Oh, he stinks. And so I say, well, do you see where I'm going here? I mean, is there a backup quarterback who's available right now for $3.5 million or less that is going to make the common fan go, oh yeah, I really like it? No, I mean these people are backup quarterbacks at this point in their career for a reason. So I know people don't like to hear it, but he's one of the more talented backup quarterbacks that are left on the market.
Geoff, I want to touch on something you just mentioned also, and that is the fact he knows the West Coast offense. This is a guy who had Cam Cameron, Jim Caldwell, Mark Trestman, Gary Kubiak. I know I'm forgetting somebody, but they had all these different coordinators in Baltimore. So you could argue that Flacco can walk into a quarterback room and say, oh, I recognize that formation for almost anything Sirianni and his staff presents. And I think that's a huge help for Jalen Hurts because now you have a guy who literally has seemingly played in almost every variation of the West Coast offense at this point.
Yeah, he has. And I believe Marty Morningweg was with the Ravens at the time that he was in his last year there as well. So obviously the connection there. That is the kind of offense that you're going to see, I believe, from Nick Sirianni and his staff. Now, sometimes you would like a backup quarterback to have a similar skill set as your starting quarterback so that if your starting quarterback goes down, then you bring in someone who can run the offense the same way. And clearly you're not going to capitalize on any mobility from Joe Flacco that you would with Jalen Hurts. But you can't always have what you want when you're looking at backups. And I know there's a school of thought that maybe you should trade for a guy like Gardner Minshew if he's available because he's younger and has that athleticism. And it's not bad. It's just that I suspect, Josh, that the Eagles are still looking at the cornerback and the linebacker market. And I don't know if they're going to get what they want from free agency. You may need some draft picks to, late kind of draft picks to deal to get a guy you might be looking for. So you'd rather save those draft picks for that instead of a backup quarterback.
Geoff Mosher joining us here, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Geoff and Adam dropped on Monday morning. They drop again tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Q&A dropped this morning on the Inside the Birds podcasting network. Geoff, you mentioned, you and Adam, on Monday about the possibility that they might not be done because you guys referred back to Jim Schwartz. What did they do? They brought in Leotis McKelvin. They brought in Nigel Bradham. They traded for Ronald Darby. So you look at Anthony Harris. That could be the first domino. Is there a specific type of player or maybe a specific name out there that maybe people should keep an eye on that maybe is the next guy that they bring in?
So actually, you may even want to consider Hassan Ridgeway re-signing as the first domino, right? Because he played in the Colts scheme before he came to the Eagles. And of course, as you mentioned, Anthony Harris. I was told, by some people to look at the Vikings and the Colts as teams where players who came from there would be natural fits for what Jonathan Gannon wants to do defensively with the Eagles. I know that Mackenzie Alexander is a free agent who I believe has not yet been signed. And he is someone that was on the Vikings for the last 4 years. So he's a name I would keep my eye on. Perhaps some linebackers, if you look at, and I don't know the status of some of the backup linebackers on the Vikings, like a Troy Davis, or there was another name on that list that I can't remember because it's just not a household name. But, I suspect that the Eagles are going to try to look for more hybrid-like players. They're going to be in a lot of nickel. They're going to be in a lot of dime, as most teams are. And they're also going to probably play more of a Zimmer-style defense, Josh, which is a lot of cover 2, some cover 3, some Tampa 2 like looks in there. And if you want to do that, you need some linebackers who really understand like pass concepts, not just running with a tight end downfield, but depth in your drops and things like that, especially in zone. I feel like Alex Singleton's strength is going to get the football in the run, side to side. We saw him really improve in that area. Not so much as a deep middle type linebacker in zone coverage. So I would look for the Eagles to try to bring in either a linebacker who really is familiar with those kind of schemes, or one of those high. How you see a lot of teams now taking safeties and making them into weak side linebackers or coverage linebackers. That may be an area that the Eagles have to explore as well for their sub packages.
Well, we know the Eagles are already moving Gerard Avery to a linebacker position as well. So it seems like they've already started that process. I know one guy in the draft people are looking a lot at as a potential guy that could be multiple positions is Asante Samuel Jr. So there are some guys out there that are interesting, but it's interesting to see you mentioned the hybrids. It feels like they're already doing that with Avery.
Yeah, I wouldn't though, only because I think Avery, while he can play in a 3-4, is better going forward, not backwards. Now, does he have the ability as a 3-4 outside linebacker to drop into a little bit of coverage? Yeah. That's a little bit different though than your inside linebacker who is, assigned to a quarter or a half the field in a certain type of zone that you're playing. So I don't think Jannard Avery is that type of guy that plays the deep middle and those crossing routes and has that kind of area to patrol. I think that if anything, he'd probably, I know they're moving him to linebacker to see if the athleticism works, but I still think he's more of a player who's best going forward and only limited is at times going backward. I really think they're just trying to preserve save face here and, have him compete. I'd be surprised if he made the team at this point, although we'll have to see. But obviously giving up a 4th round pick for him does not look very good right now.
No, it doesn't. But I'm interested because you mentioned the athleticism. Where does that leave a guy like Davion Taylor? Because remember, he was supposed to be the athletic project that they selected, they brought in. And, I mean, I don't really know what his fit is going to be. I know a lot of people liked him as a project, but when you draft a project, you got to have a plan for him, right?
Absolutely. And, some of the traits that I just mentioned about playing in those zones and dropping back and being able to run and close quickly when the ball is kept, like the old Tampa defenses, right, where they would just give up underneath, but then swarm on you. All of that takes experience. It takes knowledge. Some of those guys who played in those schemes were not like high draft picks. I forget what Derek Brooks was drafted. You probably know more than me, but they're not always high draft picks. They're usually really smart, instinctive football players. And the thing with Davion Taylor is he has such little experience in general, as both from high school to college to now, with only playing a handful of snaps last year, that I have a hard time thinking that he can do what they want him to do. Other than like right now, he's like, just put him out there and run. You saw him chase down Lamar Jackson last year because he's got great speed. But you really have to be like gap sound, assignment sound to play in specific defenses that I think Gannon's going to employ. And I just think that the bridge right now that Davion Taylor the gap that he has to bridge is very great, very vast. And it's probably going to take more than just some OTAs to have him ready for that.
Geoff Mosher, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Q&A dropped this morning, Geoff, and one of the things they brought up on there I want to ask you about, and I think that they were really they weren't just voicing the fan, they were voicing also as former players that what Nick Sirianni has said now in 2 press conferences. I thought it was very interesting hearing it from their perspective because, listen, we see people on social media, that's one thing, but now you have 2 guys who played in the league, had success, and they're sitting there saying, I'm not 100% sure about this Sirianni guy, the way he's sounding these press conferences. And they were saying, listen, maybe he is a football guy. He's not a great speaker. But to hear it from 2 former guys who played in the league saying it definitely is a little bit of added measure to the conversation.
Yeah. So Jason and Quentin, they're former players, but they're also human beings like the rest of us. And when you have the owner come out and describe Nick Sirianni as this great presence, this great communicator, someone who just blew them away in the interview process with insight and the ability to articulate a vision, but then in the press conferences you see something that's not, maybe that doesn't align with how the owner described it, then naturally human nature, you kind of wonder, well, where was the disconnect? Even Jason said that in Q&A. He said, it can't be, he couldn't have spoken like that in the interview process, right? It just doesn't compute. So they did the same thing a lot of us have done. They say, you know what, maybe it's just that he's not comfortable in this kind of environment, or that he's an over-explainer a little bit. He's a little too excited. He just, he's got to kind of get his feet underneath him and maybe it'll all start to make sense. But they're just human beings like the rest of us, and making that natural correlation to what Jeffrey Lurie said about Nick Sirianni and how Nick Sirianni has come off being not necessarily one and the same so far.
Now, with that being said, do you think that we're also maybe overlooking or maybe reading too much into the fact that, listen, this is this guy's first couple press conferences. He didn't have a lot of media experience. Obviously, he was in Indianapolis, for goodness sake. I think they have 6 beat reporters who are regularly at press conferences. Is there maybe a part of this that this guy is just not comfortable in that situation yet?
Yeah, really, it's not like what he said, right? It's just a delivery that people, and myself included, have seemed to kind of look at kind of side eye. And so maybe, I don't think anybody questions whether or not this guy is a good football mind. You just wonder, as Jason really articulated well from a player standpoint, is that once the season starts or OTAs and you're at the NovaCare it becomes kind of a bang, bang, bang thing. Here's a meeting, here's a practice, here's lunch, here's another meeting, here's a class, here's this film session. And everything is done in such an orderly and almost robotic manner. And the key on that is efficiency. Like the coaches tell the players what they need to do, the players do it, there's corrections, there's this, there's that. And if you have a coach who's talking in a meeting the way he was talking to the media, which is not making the best use of time and over explaining and almost kind of speaking in a way in which you almost sense that he doesn't think the audience understands what he's saying, then that's kind of not as efficient as you would normally like it to be. And of course, Jason and Q both made the point that who knows, we're just judging him on the press conference, but that you do have to hope that when it's time to like gather the troops together in the NovaCare or on the field on Sundays, that there's delivery, there's quickness, there's precision, and then there's efficiency.
Yeah, and there's also that famous or infamous, depending on who you ask, video of him out there, chatting up at practices, and he's a way different person on the practice field, it seems like, than in front of a microphone. So maybe there is something to that. And it's interesting because you and Adam mentioned on the podcast, the Eagles have a history of these more calm, monotone, relaxed guys. Doug Peterson, except for the couple times he got antsy with the media. Chip Kelly, except when he would get diatribes out of his way. Andy Reid with, the time is yours. Ray Rhodes wasn't even that exciting himself. You would have to argue, what was it? The last rah-rah guy was legitimately what? Well, I was going to say Dick Vermeil, because Buddy was kind of like an old man at times as well, wasn't he? Like he was kind of
but I would say the last coach to have some personality, some bombastic personality was Buddy. Yeah. But you're right. Buddy's idea of having personality is a lot different than Nick Sirianni. Right. Nick Sirianni is like the eager beaver, and Buddy just wanted to tell everybody how great his defense was, and and how much every quarterback sucked. So
yeah, Buddy wanted to tell everybody, look, I have Super Bowl rings. I was the '85 Bears coach, and
right, he wanted to trash talk and boast. Nick just wants to go out there and talk about his brother winning high school championships,
which is weird in and of itself. Geoff Mosher joins us here, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Sticking with Sirianni, because we talked about Flacco a little bit earlier. Is there any signs to you with what the Eagles have and have not done so far of what we can expect from Sirianni's offense? Because I feel like the only thing we know is, all right, well, he was in Indianapolis. He was with the Chargers. Steichen was with the Chargers for basically a decade. I mean, can we take anything more, or are we still in kind of a holding pattern with that?
I mean, I know that Nick Sirianni in the past has talked about his philosophy is trying to get the ball in the hands of his best playmakers, the ones who have the most, athleticism and speed within 5 to 15 yards, and let them make the yak yards, right? And so theoretically, Josh, he should have a couple of those players already in Miles Sanders and Jalen Reagor. Dallas Goedert for a tight end has good athleticism, and he certainly makes yards after the catch as well. So that's 3 players right now there. I don't think that there's a guy that sort of fits that bill in free agency right now that they, A, have the money to want to get, or B, are going to do. Like, I think they're going to get a veteran wide receiver, because if you don't have Marquise Goodwin here, which you don't now, then you really don't have any veterans. I mean, you have Jalen Reagor in year 2 and Arcega-Whiteside in year 3, and he may not even make the team. And Greg Ward is young, and Hightower and Watkins. So it would help to have kind of a veteran guy. But I think it would be a 1-year kind of deal, and guy maybe not get a whole lot of playing time depending on what they do in the draft. But no, I mean, as far as scheme, it's not like when Chip Kelly came in here and you knew they were going to be running up tempo and look for the lighter, faster offensive linemen and, the bigger slot. He was into that with Jordan Matthews. So far, no real, I'd say, telltale moves in that. Well, no, there haven't been any moves on offense. So they do. I do think they need a big running back. Some say you could just get that in the draft. Fine, that's fine. But I would think that they would look to upgrade that, later. Remember, they got LeGarrette Blount in May in 2017.
Yeah.
So there's time.
Yeah, there is time. And I think that sometimes people forget that, you don't just make it off season in 1 week. Like I ran into an Eagles fan last night who was like, my goodness, the Giants got a Dory Jackson. And I was like, You realize they overpaid for Adoree Jackson. All the Titan fans are making fun of the Giants now online because they're like, you paid that much money for that guy? So I think people are overlooking the fact that, yeah, the Giants got Kenny Golladay and Adoree Jackson, and they also paid them a stupid amount of money. So
They did. They paid a lot of money. But, I mean, you can make the argument, though, it does make them better. If it would be one thing if Adoree was their number one, but the fact that you can line up with James Bradbury on one side and Adoree on the other, that's still pretty good. And so if you had the money to be able to make that, I don't like when teams go crazy in free agency. They really didn't. They just spent on two guys, Golladay and Adoree. We'll see. I will say Adoree is a young guy in his second contract. Those are the type of guys that you ordinarily would like to pay. I mean, this is what the Eagles did with Brandon Brooks. They paid him pretty good money before he was Brandon Brooks, right? Like when he was coming over from Texas, they signed him to a long-term deal in free agency, and people were like, "Who's Brandon Brooks?" And he wound up becoming one of the better guards in the league, if not one of the not the best. So it's better than airing on a guy who's like 33 and you give him that kind of money.
yeah, he's getting the guy who's the sexy attraction might not always be the best move in long term. Or at least the Eagles have shown that. You mentioned LeGarrette Blount, Chris Long, guys like that. He's Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds podcast, at Geoff Mosher NFL on Twitter. The next edition drops tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Geoff Mosher, Adam Kaplan, Inside the Birds podcast. Geoff, you want to give the audience a little tease for that?
For the next Inside the Birds pod, which will drop tomorrow morning at 6, we're going to talk about give a little more insight into the Joe Flacco signing. There's a little more to that than we know. We'll continue to talk about moves that we expect the Eagles to make in the coming weeks. And hey, next week, Josh, next week will be the first installment of Inside the Draft with Greg Cosell that we'll have on our drop. It'll drop Tuesday, March 30th at 6 a.m. So we look forward to that 6-week program with Greg Cosell on our Inside the Birds platforms.
Cosell, one of the best ever when it comes to the video breakdowns. And my favorite is that when you or Adam ask him a question, sometimes he just gives this like brutal answer that like nobody else on earth is going to say what he's going to say because he just doesn't give a you-know-what sometimes what people think. And that's what I love about him.
Yeah, and he always says it's just what the tape says. It's not like he's lying or biased. That's what the tape tells him. What the tape says is what the tape says.
Yeah. I love when you guys have Cosell on. Again, that'll be this coming Tuesday, Inside the Drafts, all a part of the Inside the Birds podcasting network. And Geoff joins us every Monday and Wednesday on the Sports Bash here on 97.3 ESPN. As all guests, he appeared on the Boardwalk on the Hotline. Geoff, good to see you in the virtual flesh, and have a good one, man.
Same to you, Josh. Enjoy. Have a great day.
And, of course, Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast and brought to you by Dr. Lyle M. Back. For everything from skincare to cosmetic surgery, go to ilovelyle.com or call 856-MAKEOVER for Dr. Lyle M. Back, proud sponsor of Football at 4.